President Enrique Peña Nieto signing a new trade deal known as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement. That replaces the old NAFTA deal. Each country's legislature still must also approve that agreement. And to this, President Trump pushing back against the Mueller investigation after his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, pleads guilty on a charge that he lied to Congress. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom, Friday morning. I'm Sandra Smith.
Friday it is. Nice to see you, Sandra. I'm Bill Hammer. Good morning. President's legal team bringing up 2017 letters sent to Special Counsel Bob Mueller and the Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein. Those letters calling for an investigation of former FBI Director James Comey. All this coming on the heels of Cohen's admission that he made false statements before senators about a plan to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Here's the Harvard professor, Alan Dershowitz, on that.
Here's the problem for the president. Mueller will write a report. The report will be based on the testimony of people who have lied and who have not been cross-examined. It's devastating only if it's unrebutted, which is why it is absolutely essential for the president's team to demand that the Justice Department not allow the release of the Mueller report until they've had a chance to review it.
Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington. Catherine, good morning.
Well, thank you, Sandra. New information in the last hour from inside the federal court here in Washington. The Judge Amy Jackson setting a target date for sentencing of March 5th for the former campaign chairman Paul Manafort. But there are outstanding issues about allegations leveled by the special counsel about Manafort, the president's former campaign chairman. Manafort's legal team arrived this morning for the short hearing. The special counsel now has until December 7th to explain to the court via written submissions why they believe Manafort breached the plea agreement. The special counsel alleges that the plea deal fell apart because they say Manafort lied and did not fully cooperate. But Manafort's team says the special counsel wants information their client does not have and cannot provide. We understand that special counsel investigators pressed Manafort on the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting with Russians who promised dirt on then candidate Hillary Clinton, and specifically the involvement of the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. According to emails, Kushner abandoned the meeting early and had no interest in the Russians. Here's the president on Manafort before he headed to Argentina yesterday.
It's very sad what's happened to Paul, the way he's being treated. I've never seen anybody treated so poorly. But the question was asked to me by the New York Post, and I said, no, I have not offered any pardons. And I think they asked, or whatever, would you? I said, I'm not taking anything off the table.
In light of Michael Cohen's plea of lying to Congress, a source close to the president's legal team tells Fox that they are revisiting these letters that they sent to the special counsel Robert Mueller and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in 2017, where they asked for an investigation of the conduct and, importantly, the sworn testimony provided to Congress by former FBI Director James Comey. The letters to Mueller and Rosenstein level multiple allegations against Comey, including his handling of the Clinton email case. As you know, the Inspector General has already found Comey was insubordinate when he went around established procedures and his boss, Attorney General Loretta Lynch. The letters also call for a review of media leaks authorized by Comey to kickstart the special counsel investigation. As you know, the Justice Department Inspector General, Michael E. Horowitz, has an ongoing separate leak investigation, which also looks at the issue of whether Comey mishandled classified information. So the legal team's bottom line is they don't want to see disparate treatment. They want to see universal treatment when it comes to misleading or lying to Congress. Sandra.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Watching that at home, watching this from Argentina, President Trump facing numerous issues at the G20 summit, now underway officially. That ongoing trade war with China, expected to meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping on Saturday night. But the rising tension with Russia over this matter involving Ukraine, which the president has cited as a reason to cancel that meeting with Vladimir Putin. That sets the table for Rich Edson, watching this from the State Department. Rich, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. And the Trump administration says it has sent a strong message to Russia by canceling this meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, though Russian state media now reports the two will meet briefly at the G20 summit. To that, the White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, quote, the Russian witch hunt hoax, which is hopefully now nearing an end, is doing very well. Unfortunately, it probably does undermine our relationship with Russia. However, the reason for our canceled meeting is Ukraine. Hopefully, that will be resolved soon so that productive conversations can begin. The administration says Russia should return the 3 Ukrainian warships and their crews, all still in Russian custody. Russia attacked and seized them last weekend. The Russian government, as it often does, blames anti-Russian sentiment in the U.S. for the canceled meeting.
Is the carriage provocation created by Kiev in this region the real reason for canceling the meeting? Officially, we heard that, but is this the reality? I think we have to search for the answers in the domestic political situation in the United States.
President Trump is scheduled to have dinner at the G20 tomorrow night with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The administration has targeted hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese imports with tariffs and continues objecting to Chinese trade practices and stealing of intellectual property. The U.S. and China are also at odds over the South China Sea, where China is constructing military infrastructure on a disputed area.
Well, thank you, Rich. A lot to follow there from the State Department. Thank you, sir. Sandra's got more now.
Joining us now for more on that and what we can expect out of this G20 summit, Hugo Gurdon, Washington Examiner editorial director. Hugo, good morning to you. Has anything stood out to you so far?
Yeah, you know, I think, Sandra, that President Trump has also had a good morning in Buenos Aires. He's actually, I think, had 2 things go well for him today. The first is that he signed a new trade agreement with Mexico and Canada, both originally reluctant parties, but both of them falling into line. And President Trudeau, who was particularly reluctant, sitting down next to President Trump and signing that. I think the bigger achievement was the snub of President Putin. Very explicitly, this was about Ukraine. One of the things that going into this G20 meeting that was perhaps more important than anything else was that President Trump didn't do what he did in Helsinki, which was where he looked completely in President Putin's pocket. He looked beyond weak, and he had to reverse that. By punishing President Putin, by denying Russia a formal meeting at the G20, President Trump does something to adjust the relationship between the two. And I think that the United States is realizing, and the administration is realizing, that this aggression by Russia is a sign of weakness, and this is an opportunity for President Trump to assert dominance in this relationship.
And President Trump making that very clear on his departure. He said, I don't like that aggression, that Russian aggression. So we'll see what happens there and whether a meeting or even a very informal meeting takes place. We don't know yet. But there was this moment, as we've been looking back at some of the visuals over the past hour of the world leaders arriving, and this is the Crown Prince taking his seat after the photo op with next to Vladimir Putin. And perhaps we'll show that again while we talk about this, Hugo, but there was certainly a handshake and an embrace there. I don't know if you were able to see that live when it happened, but certainly some noticed.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. You know, the Crown Prince came to the G20, and his highest priority was to see how he was received in the wake of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The fact that he sat next to President Putin, that there was a handshake, is a little signal to the United States and to President Trump. I think it was important that no formal meeting was set up between President Trump and the Crown Prince. The White House and President Trump have played this diplomatic game with, since the murder of Khashoggi, pretty badly. President Trump has not separated that murder from the Middle East strategy. He has worried that if he's too critical of Saudi Arabia and of the Crown Prince, it might undermine the Middle East strategy against Iran, where Saudi Arabia is an integral part of this. I think probably the White House is now realizing that it can do both. It can be critical and at the same time not undermine this. So I think it's been important that he doesn't have this formal meeting with the Crown Prince, but the Crown Prince is pushing back very slightly by the warmer smiles with President Putin.
Yeah, and beyond the handshake, there was the smiles and there was the slapping of the handshake there. So certainly that was a moment that we'll look back at and wonder where these meetings go. The meeting with President Xi of China, are you optimistic that a deal will get done? Markets have been somewhat optimistic that there could eventually be a deal done, but will it be what both sides want?
Well, if there's a deal, and it clearly won't get done in the next several days, there's a long process, but one of the thing that the dinner will, I think, do with the dinner between the President of the United States and the President of China is that it'll indicate that relations are warmer than they were 2 months ago when Vice President Pence blasted China for the lying and cheating and stealing on trade and other matters. I think that the wobbly stock markets, the closure of the GM plants, which to some extent is blamed on the tariff war between China and the United States on aluminum and steel, President Trump wants a win out of this. There are certain other things that are going wrong, and he would like to get this deal. I think that there's been a distinct change in the last 2 months from when President Pence blasted China, and I think that the signs are fairly promising, and the markets are watching very closely.
And we're all left wondering as we await the next meetings here, which, by the way, we are told the president, the next time we will see him is the next couple of hours here as these meetings take place. Does anything really come of these G20 summits?
Well, I think that the interesting thing about these summits is that the communiques and those sort of things and the formal stuff, the official stuff, is much less important. But there's the signing of the trade deal, the non-meeting with Putin, the snub, in fact, of Putin, which is very explicit, and the non-meeting with Khashoggi. There's lots of things which are important, which reset the diplomatic dials. And so, yes, these meetings are important, and it's an opportunity for each one of those leaders to sort of position themselves vis-a-vis the others. And I think it's been a good morning for President Trump.
It's already been a couple moments so far. So the next meeting with the president, the bilateral meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So we await that potentially this hour. Hugo Gurdon, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
12 minutes past the hour now. The current political climate leading to new guidelines for federal employees. Why our guest in a moment says the new rules show our politics have become insane.
Plus, a Chinese scientist claims to have altered the genes in an embryo. Is it a breakthrough in the fight to cure crippling diseases or the equivalent of opening Pandora's box? We're going to have all of that for you next.
The world has expressed outrage at the first attempt to genetically modify babies in this manner because most mainstream scientists think that we don't know enough about its safety.
New government guidelines warning federal employees avoid speaking about impeachment or using the term resistance while on the job. But some ethics advocates say that likely crosses a legal line. Mark Thiessen's a columnist for the Washington Post, a Fox News contributor and fellow for the American Enterprise Institute. Mark, good morning to you. So,
good morning, Sandra.
What do you make of this new guidance, I should ask?
Well, the fact that this is controversial just shows how insane our politics have become. This is just simple common sense. In 1939, Congress passed something called the Hatch Act, which bans political activities, with the exception of a small group of people and senior positions, where bans all political activities by federal workers in the workplace. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court twice. It's been amended by Congress in 1993 and 2012, signed into law by President Obama. And what the law basically says is when you're in the workplace, you can't engage in political activity. You have to behave in a nonpartisan way. And so what the Office of Special Counsel has done, and by the way, it's been applied in a bipartisan way. The Office of Special Counsel, which enforces this law, has reprimanded Kellyanne Conway and Nikki Haley for potential violations of the Hatch Act. So this is not something that an office that has been going after Trump opponents. And what they did is they issued a guidance that says, I quote, when on duty in the federal workplace or invoking official authority, employees have to avoid political activity, and that includes advocating for impeachment or advocating resistance. And it says, this is, quote, it underscores that this only affects conduct that takes place on duty, and that employees are free to engage in political duty while off duty or away from the federal workplace. What is controversial about that? I don't understand why anyone would oppose this.
Yeah, because that's an important part of this. So in addition to advocating for or against impeachment of a candidate for federal office, you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But also terms like resistance and hashtag resist would be construed as political activity, Mark.
Yes. Because it is. If you work in the executive branch, the head of the executive branch is the president of the United States, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's Donald Trump. You can't come to work and resist your boss and his agenda. That's not your job. There are political in government. There are two types of workers. There are political appointees. When I worked in the White House, I was a political appointee. That means you come in with the Republican administration or the Democratic administration, and when they are out, you leave. And if you want to do that and be a political appointee, that's fine. But when you're a federal worker, you work for whoever is in office, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and you're supposed to serve them faithfully because you're not working for a political party. You're working for the American people. You're working for all the taxpayers, including the ones that voted for Donald Trump. And if you can't do that, if you can't behave in a nonpartisan way, quit, leave.
Now to your latest piece, Mark. Gene editing is here. It's an enormous threat. And you write this as a Chinese scientist, as we now know, has claimed to have created the first genetically edited babies. And that, of course, evoked widespread condemnation. Some people saying it's far too premature. You're asking the question in this piece, should we be doing this at all?
Absolutely, it's a really it's a fork in the road for us as humanity. I mean, if you think about this, there's two different things. There's gene therapy and gene editing, and genetic engineering, which are two different things. Gene therapy is a really promising part of medicine where doctors can go in and repair faulty DNA to fight cancer or genetic diseases and all the rest of that. And when you make those changes stay in the body of the patient. Genetic engineering is something else. Genetic engineering is when they take a new life in a petri dish and change its genetic code entirely. And those changes are passed on from generation to generation. So once you unleash this, if you make a mistake or do something wrong, it's not just that one person that's affected. It's all of their children and their children's children who could be affected by this. And playing with humanity's genetic code is extremely problematic. And it really, quite frankly, it could be the end of the American dream. Because if you think about it, if you can alter the genes to fight disease, you can also alter genes to create superhumans. The same technique that can be used to fight muscular dystrophy could be used to give people super strength or super speed. Fighting the same technique to fight dementia could give people enhanced memory or cognition, and only the wealthy will be able to afford that. So we'll have two classes of people: the genetically enhanced elites and the unenhanced poor. And this whole concept that our country is built on, that anybody through hard work can advance themselves, will be gone, will be effectively dead.
It's a great piece for anybody who's interested in reading it. You conclude it by saying this is the bottom line. We should not be playing God. Genetic research, you say, when used to create made-to-order super children, we have crossed a moral line from which there may be no return. Mark Thiessen, good to have you on the program this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Facebook under fire yet again. A top company executive reportedly told the staff to research George Soros. But about what? What the social network was looking for in a statement coming up on that. Also, some migrants in Mexico are protesting the speed their claims are being processed by the U.S. government. But there's a lawmaker saying that we need solutions for both countries. That lawmaker's coming up here.
The leaders in Mexico care very much about this issue. They want to make sure that Mexico isn't just a thoroughfare for people passing through these northern triangle states, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, trying to get to the United States.
Watching the stock market, a couple hours into trading, U.S. stocks opening lower, down just a few points ahead of a key meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi. The two leaders will plan to speak on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Argentina. They are expected to focus on those tariffs that President Trump has placed on Chinese goods. Ahead of that, markets pretty much flat, the Dow down 37 points.
Facebook company executive Sheryl Sandberg reportedly telling staffers to research billionaire George Soros and his financial interests. That request coming after Soros apparently bashed the social media giant, calling it a, quote, menace. Jackie Heinrich has the story from here in New York. Jackie, good morning.
Good morning. According to the New York Times, Facebook confirmed that Sheryl Sandberg asked her communications team to determine if George Soros would profit from attacks against the social media giant. But just 2 weeks ago, Sandberg denied knowledge about a separate effort to push negative stories about Soros. It's causing questions about just how much Facebook's second-in-command was involved in a campaign against the liberal billionaire. The request from Sandberg came after Soros blasted tech companies in a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. saying the companies could threaten democracy and impact human behavior. That speech coming at a time when Facebook was under the microscope for disseminating Russian propaganda. But Sandberg's earlier denial was related to a separate push to circulate negative stories about Soros that put Facebook in hot water. Facebook hired public relations firm Definers to dole out information to reporters about Soros's funding of American advocacy groups that were critical of Facebook. The New York Times revealed that relationship in an investigation, calling it campaign-style opposition research aimed to discredit critics of the company. Facebook severed the relationship following the Times investigation after their work with Definers grew criticism in wake of anti-Semitic campaigns against Soros. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg wrote, quote, "I want to emphasize that it was never anyone's intention to play into an anti-Semitic narrative against Mr. Soros or anyone else. Being Jewish is a core part of who I am, and our company stands firmly against hate. The idea that our work has been interpreted as anti-Semitic is abhorrent and deeply personal." Sandberg later announced in an internal audit into how Facebook policies affected minority users and also employees. We're waiting to hear back this morning from Soros.
Well, for that, thank you, Jackie Heinrich here in New York. Thank you, Jackie. Sandra.
Former FBI Director James Comey challenging his subpoena from House Republicans seeking a closed-door testimony why he is asking a judge to call it off.
Also, the wall could prompt a government shutdown this month. What will it take to get both sides on board? Former U.S. Congressman Jason Chaffetz has 7 very direct questions, and he's live next.
The president is the only person who holds the ultimate responsibility for a government shutdown. It would be a shame if the country suffered because of a Trump temper tantrum.
This is a Fox News alert. A group of migrants camped out along the southern border in Mexico, launching a hunger strike. They hope to pressure the U.S. and Mexico to speed the asylum process. Here's Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton earlier.
I think Mexico made a huge mistake letting these people cross their southern border. They're going to have to deal with that in the future. And now I agree with the mayor of Tijuana. He's got a problem. He's got to expend all these resources that he doesn't have. And there's no time limit on it. So we are these people are stuck in a really bad situation, and so is the mayor of Tijuana and the people of Tijuana.
Jeff Paul is in Tijuana, Mexico, for us this morning with more. Jeff.
Yeah, Sandra, it was a rough night for thousands of migrants here at the main shelter in Tijuana. As you see, many of them now moving from the inside of that shelter, living out in the street in tents where it is much drier. It rained pretty much all day yesterday, through the night into the morning, and that is making the conditions out here only that much worse. As a result, now many, as you take a look at some of this video, boarding buses last night to go to a new shelter. This shelter is about a half an hour away and offers much more space and a little covering for the elements. A big part of this move has to deal with health. So many migrants packed together in such a tight space. Sickness is becoming an issue. Local health officials tell us 60% suffer from some sort of respiratory infection, and migrants now worry it might only get worse.
You hear children coughing, for example, and you hear that they start crying because they can't take it. They start coughing and coughing and coughing and coughing. And if you think about it, we adults cannot even take it sometimes, and with children, it's obviously it turns like much more difficult, you know.
Now, we were with a group of migrants yesterday, about a dozen or so, who were trying to march towards the immigration offices in Mexico to protest. They were stopped by Mexican federal police who told them they had orders to not let them go any further. As a result, that group then sat down and are now undergoing a hunger strike to bring attention to what they are going through. We're also hearing that resources out here, at least from the city side, they're cutting off food provided by the government to sort of entice these groups and these people to go to the new shelter. We'll see how many people move today or how many people just altogether give up on that dream of the United States and head back home to Central America. Sandra.
Jeff Paul in Tijuana, Mexico for us. Thank you.
The only position that cannot garner 60 votes is the president's position. He is adamant about having a partial shutdown. He keeps repeating over and over again that he wants a shutdown. And make no mistake about it, He is the only reason there would be a shutdown.
Well, Senator Chuck Schumer there on the floor slamming the president's threats to shut down the government over border wall funding. You might have a deal, you might not. The deadline is a week away, but lawmakers have not agreed on border security. Former U.S. Congressman, Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz has 7 questions he says Democrats who claim to be in support of border security need to answer. That's the headline at foxnews.com. Morning, sir. What are your questions?
Good morning. Well, it starts with, what do you actually support? You know, I was on the immigration subcommittee there in the House Judiciary Committee when the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. They did not introduce a single bill. We didn't have a hearing or address a single bill during that time. So you hear Chuck Schumer and others complain about it, but give me an example of one piece of legislation that you think can actually pass the body. There are other things that need to be addressed. Why not the wall? If you're opposed to the wall, do you want to tear down the current wall? If you say that a border wall doesn't work, do you think that maybe we should tear down the current wall? Those are the types of things that we need to ask the Democrats, because I think they like the issue. I don't think they actually want to solve the problem.
Do you think there is a deal to be had? We're reading overnight that this $5 billion that the president wants, he's got it in the House, but the Senate might be able to do it over a 2-year period. Is that a compromise that's possible?
Yeah, I do. Look, the president needs this money. We're demonstrating right now in real time that a border wall does work. And that's one of the questions to the Democrats. If you really, truly do believe in securing the border, then how do you propose to do it if you're opposed to a wall? And that's a question that the Democrats have never answered. Can they get to a compromise? Perhaps. But $5 billion out of $4 trillion that is going to be spent over the next 12 months is not a big ask from the president.
In your previous life as head of Oversight Committee, you know all about these subpoenas. And you're well in touch with what's happening with James Comey. He wants to have an open hearing in Congress. And I don't know if he's going to get it or not, but the two sides are going back and forth. Bob Goodlatte earlier today with us was making the case about transparency. Soundbite number 1, guys. Here's what he said.
Since Jim Comey claims he wants transparency, we've already indicated that we will release the transcript of this under oath private interview the next day after it takes place. We're almost done with this investigation. He's one of the last witnesses. 16 other people have testified under oath in the same setting that we're asking him to do it.
And so he also went on to say that he's got hundreds of questions, and he gave a few of them to us a bit earlier today. The problem is the calendar. You know, Republicans only have the majority in this committee for a few more weeks. You can make the argument a few more days if you count the number of days that Congress is in session. What gives on this, do you believe?
Well, James Comey said he doesn't do sneaky stuff, and he says he doesn't leak, and we know both of those things are not true. The House is quite tardy in compelling Mr. Comey to come appear before the committee. They should have done this a couple months ago in order to not do what Comey wants to do now, which is run out the clock. I mean, it's all about clock management, and that's why Comey is going to court trying to delay this, because we know that the Democrats have no interest in getting to the truth. They have no interest in pursuing this. So it is about clock management, and you don't get to choose how you testify before Congress. Just like you don't get to choose, unless you're Hillary Clinton, how you're going to testify or answer questions from the FBI. It's not like an optional, choose which one is most convenient for you, but that's the way Comey wants to have it.
So it appears to me that he's negotiating publicly, right?
Hey, look, he tries to play the transparency card, but what he's really trying to avoid is having to answer an hour's worth of questions from a guy like Trey Gowdy or John Ratcliffe. That's what he's trying to avoid. In Congress, you get 5 minutes from the Republicans, then you get 5 minutes to take a deep breath while Democrats ask you nothing. And so what happens in the transcribed interview is each side gets 1 hour, and there is no end to that. You go an hour for Republicans, an hour for Democrats, an hour for Republicans, and that just goes on. Does it go 12 hours? Does it go 2 hours? They got to get through all the questions, and you can't say no. You got to answer the questions.
Okay, I have one more question for you. Here's the tweet from Comey from yesterday, I do believe. He says, today my legal team filed court papers to get to transparency from House Republicans. Let the American people watch. All right, you used to do this stuff. How would you resolve it?
Yeah. Hey, if you want to videotape it, Mr. Comey wants to work with the Democrats and ask for unanimous consent to broadcast how they would do a transcribed interview and put that up. My guess is that Fox and others would cover it, but you get an hour and one person gets to ask those questions and then you get to go to the next hour. So they can try to waive all of those rules, but Comey is trying to have it two different ways, and it's not adding up. He's just trying to get to January. That's what he's trying to do.
We'll see if that happens. Thank you, sir. Jason Chaffetz with us today. Thank you. Nice to have you on our program.
Thank you.
President Trump calling for the end of the Mueller investigation after his former attorney, Michael Cohen, pled guilty to lying to Congress. So what does this mean for the Mueller probe and for the president?
The only thing that changes, Brian, really is political. It's not legal. During the campaign, the Trump campaign conveyed the message that the president, the now president, had nothing to do with Russia, no deals.
Here is the class photo we watched together live about an hour ago. The Prime Minister from Japan there with President Trump in the center of that room, and Justin Trudeau splitting the difference between the two of them behind there. We will see what we call tape play out in a moment here, because there's a bilateral meeting that the president will have with the Japanese Prime Minister Abe, and that was on the schedule for about 2 minutes from now. We're told they're a little bit behind schedule, so when it happens, we'll get that to you, and we'll get some comments from the president down there in Argentina. Big meeting now underway, the G20, loads of issues on the table, and we'll go through all of them today and over the weekend here on Fox. 17 minutes before now.
President Trump calling for an end to the Mueller probe after his former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty to lying to Congress about work he did on a Trump real estate project in Russia. Let's bring in Stacey Plaskett, Virgin Islands Congresswoman and a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Congresswoman, thank you for coming on the program this morning. So the president maintains that this is a, quote, total witch hunt. He's accusing the special counsel of ignoring crimes committed by the other side, as he wrote in a pair of tweets after he landed in Argentina yesterday. We're all left wondering where this goes next. What can you tell us?
Well, you know, as a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, we've really been watching the special counsel Mueller do his work. We think he's done this in a methodical manner. He was given broad discretion, but the discretion was related to the Russia entanglement in our elections. And I think that's specifically where he's keeping to. We've seen with different individuals who were involved in President Trump's campaign, as well as his early administration, have been entangled in this. And it's our job as members of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee to continue watching that and to do our job, our constitutional job, which is to provide oversight over government operations, as well as this administration. And so I think, you know, I was a member of the Ashcroft Justice Department under President Bush, where Mueller was the FBI director at that time, and I think he's done a fantastic job thus far.
But of course, many of those lawmakers who have supported this process and said, let it play out. Senator Kennedy has been one of them. He's saying this has gone on too long, 17 months. Let's, you know, be transparent with the American people on where this investigation stands. He said this yesterday.
Well, you know, I think
my biggest concern in terms of the Mueller investigation, let's get it all wrapped up. And it looks to me like there's some movement in terms of, I don't want to tell Mr. Mueller how to do his job. He doesn't need my counsel on that. He seems quite able. But we do need to wrap it up. It's been, what, 17 months now, and the American people are entitled to know what happened and who, if anybody, broke the law.
He respectfully says, I don't want to tell Mueller how to do his job here, but the American people deserve some answers on where this thing stands nearly 2 years in.
Sure. And I think that, you know, in terms of, I know this is a long period of time for a news cycle, but this is really not a long period of time in terms of a special prosecutor investigation, as we've seen other special prosecutors taking actually much longer without the kind of results that Mueller has been able to get in terms of the number of convictions that he has received thus far from individuals.